companies are going to have to report on their corporate sustainability. So that's greenhouse gas emissions, pollution, water use, social responsibility as well, right? And it's, it's huge. It's one of the largest, most ambitious obligatory reporting standards in the world. So as you said, it's starting with the big companies, and so this year and then next year it will be smaller companies. You have to report on your company, what they're doing. But you also have to look at your value chain, right? So your supply chain. So, and that's something that's really important as well, right? So it's not just how you're polluting, but if you're buying something from someone who's polluting, or if you're, maybe you might have, some human rights abuses in your supply chain as well. And that's something that will come to light. So it's really a huge reporting standard.
Welcome to the Urbanista, where we discuss the water management challenges of Nordic cities. From safe drinking water distribution and stormwater collection to building sustainable urban living environments. Here is your host, Delphine Vesalo.
No, hey, welcome back, Urbanistas. We are back with another show with the water industry news that you need to know, in collaboration with Global Water Intelligence. And with me today, as always, is Tallulah Lutkin, Utility Performance Editor at GWI. Hello, Tallulah.
Hi, Delphine. It's good to be back.
Today, we have a selection of highlights, actually, that will be super interesting for all of you. A selection of highlights from the recent COP28 in Dubai. And what was the discussion about the water? Hint, hint, there was not too much. The latest on direct potable reuse. The consequences of Europe's new corporate sustainability reporting directive, an update on Germany's sludge management regulations, and some extra topic about water utilities in Sweden. That we will go down into that in a moment. So let's get started. So Tallulah, of course you were, I don't know you personally, but anyway, the team at GWI was present at COP28 in Dubai recently. And it looks like the water topic was a lot disappointing, because there was not the level of discussion that was expected, really. And so tell us more about what was happening from that. What was the discussion from the COP28?
Yeah, that's right. So, I think that we're biased as water people. We always want water to be front and center of everything. And, we say, water is the key to the climate crisis, which is definitely true, by the way. So I guess COP28 felt a little bit disappointing from that perspective. So I wasn't there personally, but my colleague Emily went, and I was following the COP from online. So there's actually, you can go to a lot of the sessions online. It's a sort of, you don't have to fly and use your carbon impact by flying there. You can actually follow most of it online. So what's important to know about COP is that it's very overwhelming. It's really hard to cut through the noise, a lot of competing interests, like everyone comes. And so from that regard, it's hard for any topic to kind of cut through the noise. And I guess that the good news is that water has been managing to make a place for itself in the last few years. So COP has thematic days. So it's like over 2 weeks, and every day has a different theme. And since 2022, water has actually been one of those themes, right? So there's been a water day at COP since 2022. And there's also been a water pavilion. So like a physical space within COP where, water industry can kind of come together. And at COP28 this year, the biggest news, I guess, for water was the inclusion of new articles in the Global Goal for Adaptation. So the Global Goal for Adaptation was part of the Paris Agreement, but it was quite vague. And now they've kind of made some new additions and some sort of more specific articles. And there are sort of new articles that stipulate that countries who've signed up need to work to reduce water scarcity and to increase climate resilience to water-related risks. So there's really this kind of specific thing about water, that water is a big climate risk, and that countries need to work towards their climate resilience. So that's the good news. That water is present at COP. But for me, it kind of stops there. So I said there was a water day at COP, and the water day was centered around sort of 3 themes. There's water and food. So, water resilient food systems, urban water resilience, which I think for us is maybe the most important thing, right? So that's
the topic, actually. That was the topic, but was, again, a bit disappointed.
Exactly. Yeah. So, so from my perspective, water and food, got all the attention, which is good. I mean, we need water resilient food systems, but from the sort of a utilities perspective, it's kind of not really necessarily the kind of thing that will mean that they will get sort of some more financial aid. So there's very little announcements on urban water resilience, a few here and there, some announcements from the British government. They're going to provide a few million here. But it was really kind of quite limited and there wasn't a lot on the utilities. And I think that that's really the key point here is that, there's a lack of announcements on urban water resilience, and that highlights that there's actually no utility attendance, right? Very few utilities attend COP. And although sort of, water was brought to the forefront of the global agenda this year, right? We had the UN Water Conference back in March. We had COP28 with Water Day. But actually, the utilities themselves were kind of absent from that conversation almost. They weren't at center stage. And considering that the utilities are the ones who are actually going to be delivering on these goals, right? So the utilities are the ones who are going to be delivering SDG 6, going to be delivering on net zero. They're going to have to, increase their resilience. All these systems, all this infrastructure is, the brunt of the burden is on utilities. It feels a little bit of a shame that the utilities themselves aren't there. So I think that future, I'd like to see more utilities at these big conferences.
Because you mentioned when it was the first time when the water topic started to be discussed at the COP. It was not that long ago. You mentioned 2019, I believe.
So it was COP26 in Glasgow, was when water sort of really broke onto the scene. There was a water pavilion, there was a water day. And you may remember that also that was the year when all of the UK utilities, because the COP was in Glasgow in the UK, Water UK managed to push this goal for all the water utilities to sign up to net zero. So that was kind of the big splash of water was at COP26. And since then, so that, made us very hopeful as an industry that this was the moment that we were going to talk more about water. But since then, yes, there's still been a water day. Yes, there's still been a water pavilion, but water is still struggling to cut through the noise at COP for sure.
Precisely because I'm a bit surprised that it was only in 2022 when the water topic started to be discussed at COP. How many these type of events have been historically?
28, right? So this is COP28 means it's the 28th COP. So
28 years.
Yep.
28 years. Yep. And just a couple of years ago, we are discussing water as a key topic for within the environmental agenda.
Mm-hmm. So whether you're an optimist or a pessimist, you can say, well, that's great. Finally, water is here. Or you can say, oh my gosh, water has only been discussed for the last couple of years and it's, we're 20 years in. So
to start the conversation, then let's see how fast or not that moves. So that would be the thing, because if there had been topics that have been already in the agenda for many years, and it still is difficult that they move after being many years in the agenda, in the COP agenda. Well, we can just hope that this will start to move faster in the water topic.
Yep, fingers crossed. We are hopeful.
Well, we are hopeful. Yes, that's it. Then moving on, we have an example which may feel a bit far from the European reality, but I guess there's a learning there. DPR faces some tough road ahead in California, so where they are already implementing this. So last month in California became only the second United States state to approve the standards for direct potable reuse, setting these super stringent treatment requirements, which means that in the near term, that will be focused, or they will be pretty much only in the scope of big utilities or larger suppliers, which is kind of a shame. So tell us more about this.
Yeah, that's right. So California became the second US state to basically to adopt regulations that kind of, frame direct potable reuse. So it's not making it legal. It's kind of saying, well, these are the standards that you need to meet to, to be able to do direct potable reuse. And so the first state was Colorado, which I think was sometime last year. And so California is the second. And potable reuse has been a discussion in California for a long time, right? Even back in the 90s, there've been they've been wanting to do this. And obviously the issue is always with direct potable reuse, right? It's this question of toilet to tap, and people get a bit disgusted by the idea of having their wastewater back in their drinking water system. But California has faced such big problems with water scarcity, drought. I mean, we've been hearing about this mega drought in California for 10 years now.
More, yes.
I think that's really forced the issue. So they've put in place these regulations, and so what we're hoping is that will unlock the market and enable some plants to come to light. But you're right, there are a lot of challenges. One of them being the expense. It's very expensive to do direct potable reuse. The other thing that they do in California is desalination, which is also struggling because despite them having water scarcity issues, it's very expensive to do, and so it's very difficult.
Why is that expensive?
Why is DPR expensive? It's just all the technologies that you need to put in place, right? So you have to add tertiary treatment, which are the most expensive water technologies. And also although these regulations are in place, and that gives them a framework, which is great, they are very, very, very stringent. So as well as the technologies, you need to have a lot of, monitoring, water quality testing in place to be able to make sure that you're meeting those standards and that the water is safe.
So just to start, there needs a significant effort in money and resources just to start doing it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So there's a plant in LA, the Pure Water project, which is undergoing, and I think they're already over budget, right? They've already spent more than they thought they were going to need to spend for this project. It's a huge project. It's one of the biggest reuse projects in the world. But yeah, it's already over budget, so it's definitely huge drain on resources. And actually, one of the challenges that California is probably going to have is the fact that this regulation is now in place means that so more people are going to be wanting to do it, which means there'll be competition on the market for the contractors, the supplies, the resources. And so that would probably push project prices up because, everyone wants to do it. So then there are limited people who can actually do this kind of thing. So it's going to push prices up, which is not ideal.
Which that's the reason. Okay, prices up, but that's the reason. The fact that there's a need for a significant investment just to start. That's why it's limited to just the big players. So what the small players or the medium-sized players can expect, or just watch and see?
Yeah, I think you're right. We'll just watch and see. I think we're going to see some big projects, some expensive projects out there. But I think for the smaller utilities, it's going to be difficult. Although, we have seen utilities maybe band together to cooperate and have a common plant. And I think that what we're seeing as well is that you'll have these big players who will do the direct potable reuse. And rather than it being the utilities themselves, right? So the system is probably going to be that the utilities will sell their wastewater to these direct potable reuse plants, right? And that's actually another challenge that they're seeing is that this has, these negotiations have kind of started, and it's actually difficult. The negotiations are difficult. The utilities want to sell their wastewater, but it's kind of, there's no sort of process. Nobody's ever really done this before. So it's one of the other challenges as well, is that the negotiations have been a bit adversarial, in this kind of transaction of getting the wastewater. So that's another challenge as well, is like you say, it's going to be big players. They're going to have to cooperate with the utilities to get the wastewater, right? Which is the sort of resource for these direct potable reuse plants. So yeah, it's a long road ahead. I think it's, the regulation was the first step, but we're definitely not at the stage where everyone is drinking direct potable reuse water, for sure.
Do we see this happening in Europe anytime soon, this type of regulations coming? What do you think?
No.
No, that's it. Okay, let's move on.
No, I think that if we look at the long term, I think that it will probably happen at some point. I mean, obviously California has these big water scarcity problems, but we've been seeing in the last few years big droughts happening in Europe, dry riverbeds, something that we're not used to seeing in Europe. And I think that little by little people are starting to think about it, but that's very long term. Currently, with Europe is at the stage where it's looking at indirect potable reuse. So last year there was some regulations that came through the European Union, which would facilitate non-potable reuse, right? So reuse, but that would be used for agriculture and for some industrial processes as well. And during the sort of negotiations for this, some people were advocating for facilitating indirect potable reuse, which means, through groundwater, right? So you're going to treat your water. You're not going to put it straight back into a drinking water plant, but you're going to put it into your aquifer to recharge your aquifer. And then you're going to use that aquifer to then, so there's kind of that environmental buffer is what they call it. So for indirect potable reuse. But there were some concerns for water quality. So regulation didn't go through, right? So they've got the regulation for sort of agriculture and industrial, but the indirect potable reuse is still limited on the European stage, right? So I think there are a few countries that are doing it. I've heard of some plants some small pilot plants, like in France, where they're trying to test out indirect potable reuse. But yeah, that's, and indirect potable reuse is something that they've been doing in California for a long time. They've been doing in Australia for a long time. And in Europe, it's only just sort of starting. So I think we're a long way in Europe from direct potable reuse for sure. But, what's happening in California is a good example. We can see the challenges, we can see what regulations, and maybe learn from the US when at some point down the line, Europe might want to do direct potable reuse.
Yeah, we want to go also that route. But as you said, well, nothing coming in the short midterm. So, well, let's wait and see.
Yeah, let's watch California and learn.
Watch California. Yeah. The ones that cannot just sit, wait, and see are many companies, actually in Europe, regarding the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And this is kind of another biggie here. Like thousands of companies will have now to start assessing their water impact under the new European Union standards that is kicking already this month. And as the European Union implements most of these ambitious sustainability reporting requirements, some sources, as we have been reading, have suggested that this is likely to drive practical action towards improved industrial water management. Okay, that sounds fine. However, the water industry experts are a bit worried that these standards may end up creating an unexpected burden and on the already overstretched water utility services. So tell us more about this.
Yeah, exactly. This is for me huge news. I'm surprised that this isn't like frontline news. Just not even in the water space, but across news. So the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive basically is companies are going to have to report on their corporate sustainability. So that's greenhouse gas emissions, pollution, water use, social responsibility as well, right? And it's, it's huge. It's one of the largest, most ambitious obligatory reporting standards in the world. So as you said, it's starting with the big companies, and so this year and then next year it will be smaller companies, depending on number of employees. Basically, so I think it's starting this year with companies over 500 employees, and there might be
there's a series I read in the article that you shared. There's a series of requisites, large companies more than 500 employees, over other large companies with over 250 but 50 million euros of net revenue or 25 million in total asset value. There's a bunch of combinations.
Yeah, there are all these categories exactly for the.
But maybe what we will do, because this is very very detailed, and we may put a link on the show notes to this source where we can the people can check more, which is the case that they applies to them.
Yeah, so if you want more detail about the different categories, you can definitely go check out that article. So in broad terms, you have to report on your sustainability, which is you have to report on your company, what they're doing. But you also have to look at your value chain, right? So your supply chain. So, and that's something that's really important as well, right? So it's not just how you're polluting, but if you're buying something from someone who's polluting, or if you're, maybe you might have, some human rights abuses in your supply chain as well. And that's something that will come to light. So it's really a huge reporting standard. And also, so when it comes to water, one of the really interesting things is, so companies will have to report on their water impact, but they also need to look at the financial impact of water on them, right? So whether, for example, you might be a food and beverage company, you might be, producing crisps or something. And if there's some water scarcity where you get your potatoes from, that might be an issue for you. So you kind of need to look at not just your impact on water, but the impact the water is having on your business. And that's really, really important, because that means that, industries will have to get more involved in mitigating those impacts, right? So they're going to, say, oh, actually, well, if there's water scarcity in this area, this is going to cost us millions of euros, in our business. And so that means that they might get more involved and not take water for granted so much. I think that in the industrial world has kind of been maybe a bit flippant with their water use. And so maybe this is something that will kind of get them more involved in mitigating those impacts.
Because there's one thing here that I am spotting, that is in order to meet some of these requirements of these reviews, if the company needs to fix or needs to adapt something in their operations, that means that there may be, highly likely, maybe a financial impact in the company. That is one thing which, of course, needs to be reported on the financial statements of that company. So this is going very far indeed.
Exactly. And that's what I'm getting excited about this, because it means that, like you say, because there's that financial impact, that number in euros, about how much this is going to cost, that will really make the companies sit up and pay attention to this. Because, you can talk about water impacts and water scarcity and you don't really know what it means. But if you see that number, as you say, on a balance sheet, like this is your risk, I think that's something that will really make the companies pay attention to their water impacts and the impact water is having on them as well. So yeah, you're right. It goes very far, and and also there's a legal, it's legally binding, right? So if you don't comply with these reporting standards, that could have consequences as well. You could have some. I don't think they've announced fines, but there's definitely some kind of legal component to non-compliance with these standards. So it goes quite far, and it's I don't know. I think it's a good thing. It's a really big news for the water industry.
It's indeed big news. Yeah, well, quantifying the water's financial risk, if we can put it that way. Well, unfortunately, only when the money is involved, that's when we react, or when the companies or the board of directors that's when they really react, when they see their financial situation or an impact on their financial situation. So that is okay. On one side, if there's no pressure from the monetary side, they don't do anything. Only when this comes, okay, that would make I guess that will make a good case that they proceed with this. All these water-related disclosures related to the CSRD, because I have been here, and again, we may put a link to explain all these things. What is exactly, which are the subject matters that are included in this? There are 5 categories that include climate change, pollution, water and marine resources, biodiversity and ecosystems, and circular economy. Yeah, so famous circular economy. So it's quite comprehensive. This. Absolutely. And we recommend that go and check that directly on the link that we are going to put on the show notes. Anything else that we can elaborate on or to conclude this topic?
Yeah, I think so something really important to talk about is the impact this is going to have on water utilities, right?
Right, yeah, because they are companies anyway.
Exactly.
I mean, private or public, yes, but if regardless of the line of business, a company that meets the requisites should fulfill these requirements. In the case of water utilities?
Yep. So water utilities are included in this. At the moment, because it's the larger companies, there aren't so many, because water utilities tend to be quite small, but there are some big ones. In Germany, there are some that are definitely included in this. And so there are kind of two aspects to this, right? So there's the ones that are directly impacted, like you say, that are, they are companies, they're included in this reporting directive. And that means that they're going to have to start, reporting on all these things. And a lot of utilities are sort of worried that this is going to put an extra burden on them, because I think that, big companies they've already been doing CSR reporting for quite a while, right? So they can maybe take this into their stride. Utilities, it's not necessarily something that they have been doing very much. From the water side, it's probably fine, but it's all these other aspects, right? The greenhouse gas emissions, the social responsibility, all these different things, which they might not be collecting data on already. And so that's going to put another extra reporting burden on them, which is quite difficult. So, consultants out there, you might have an opportunity here to provide some help to water utilities. But it's not just the big utilities who are directly impacted. It's also the smaller utilities, because in fact, as I mentioned before, it's not just the companies directly, it's also their whole value chain. And so you as a water utility, you might be included in that value chain of one of these big companies, right? As you might be, have some kind of agreement with, I have no idea, Coca-Cola to provide water to them or something like that as a small municipality. And then that would, include you in the value chain of that company and mean that you would have to also start, collecting data to provide to your to your industrial partner, that you would be part of their value chain. So that's the other component as well. So there's the direct impact and then the indirect impact on the smaller utilities who are part of a value chain. And I think that, they're a little bit worried about this, but I think they're just going to have to, take it in their stride and hire some good consultants and try and figure it out.
And talking about consultants, because actually that is hint. We will have an expert on CSRD, a consultant that specifically helps companies on this. So stay tuned, Urbanistas, because we will deep dive into this topic in a few weeks. We will drop that episode, so you don't want to miss that if you want to really deep dive into requirements and the intricacies and what does it mean financially and legally for your company, whether utility or not. So that's stay tuned on that. Then staying in Europe, it looked like in Germany, they are looking for new ways to close this sludge management gap. So what is this about?
Yeah, so this is an interesting sort of update, I guess, on the regulations in Germany. So back in 2015, there's regulation came into effect in Germany about sludge. So and it was kind of like twofold. So one part was that utilities would no longer be able to dispose of their sludge through land spreading, right? Which is something quite common practice in Europe, I think, just to sort of, give your sludge to agriculture and sort of spread it on land. And so the other component is that they had to recover phosphorus from sludge, right? So you've got to not dispose of your sludge through land thinning, and you've got to recover phosphorus from sludge. So in theory, it's quite good, because what you're going to do is you're going to incinerate your sludge instead of spreading it on land, and then you can recover the phosphorus from the ash that's left over from that incineration. So in theory, it's kind of a nice tied up in a nice little bow, and utilities had until so depending on the size of the utility, either 2029 or 2032 to fulfill this new requirement. And also, it was kind of a good idea for the phosphorus as well, because Germany and quite a lot of Europe depend on importing phosphorus, and this would have provided a sort of self-sufficient supply to the country. So it was it seemed like a good idea. But at this point, we're sort of halfway through the time limit for this regulation, and it seems that utilities are not on track to meet the targets. And that means that environment ministers have kind of launched this call to action to try and get utilities to accelerate their investment. So I've got a few numbers. I mean, I think, again, there's an article which I think we'll put in the show notes where you can go and have a look at that, at the numbers and the charts. But roughly, Germany needs, there's about 1.6 million.
1.667 million. I mean, 1.6 million thousand, 1.6 million tons.
Tons, yeah, that's right.
We put a bit of context in this, the dimension of this thing. And for the most part is mono-incineration or co-incineration. And as you may say, the land recycling has been reducing significantly since 2017 to, 2022, which is the latest data we have.
So they have managed to reduce land spreading quite significantly. We're not quite there yet. I think the chart says there's still like over 300 million tons that need to be, 300,000 tons that need to be still, put into incineration rather than land filling. But I think so. It's interesting to see. So the incineration part, they're kind of there. They're kind of on track. There's still some work to do, but sludge is being incinerated more. But it's kind of that next step, which is the phosphorus recovery, which is really kind of not on track. So there are a couple of reasons to this. First of all, phosphorus recovery technology, it does exist, and it has been proven to work. So from the ash. But it's kind of working at a small scale, and it's sort of unclear how well it works at a larger scale, so the larger scale that Germany would need. And utilities are a little bit hesitant to commission plants because, maybe these plants will have teething problems, it'll probably be quite expensive, and nobody wants to be the first one to sort of, go into this and take the risk, I guess, that it might not work perfectly in the first instance. So there's obviously a cost issue. And that cost issue is compounded by the fact that it's kind of unclear whether the utilities are allowed to raise their wastewater tariffs to pay for this, right? So different, Germany is a federal state, and so different states are saying different things about whether you can raise your wastewater tariffs to pay for this extra expense of phosphorus recovery. So the utilities are like, we're not really quite sure if we want to do this yet, and so that's not really on track.
Yeah, they're kind of in the middle, so they need to comply. They would like to do all these things, but that implies cost.
Exactly.
Then, but that cost should come from somewhere. Raising the tariffs, but then that has also a political. Yes, and a social impact. So raising the tariffs for the people, that is not popular neither. So then, water utilities are in a really tough position.
Yeah, I think it's a conversation we've had, you and I, before, Delphin, about this question about, all these great technologies, all these great things, circular economy, it's great, but it costs so much money, and the utilities are always sort of, find it difficult to invest. Like you say, tariffs are political. It's hard to raise tariffs to pay for it. And so the question is, where does the money come from for this? And the government ministers are sort of seeing this, and they're asking utilities to get on track. So maybe that will unlock a little bit of funding to help, but it's not a given. And so we'll see how this evolves.
Well, let's see how this topic develops. Talking about water utilities in tough situations, we have some story involving legal items in Sweden. Water utilities in Sweden. Tell us more about this.
Yeah, so this is our PFAS story. And PFAS is always something to talk about when it comes to PFAS. And so, there's been a lawsuit it's a small town in Sweden where the residents sued their local water utility for, personal injuries due to PFAS contamination, right? So the residents are saying our water was contaminated by PFAS, and that has had a detrimental effect on our health. And so they're suing the water utility. And in this case, the residents won the case, right? So that the courts said, yes, it is the water utility's fault. And so I think that, for me at least, this sets quite a dangerous precedent for water utilities. If the responsibility for PFAS contamination can be laid at their door, I think it's going to be very difficult. We keep talking about extra burdens for utilities, extra water, reporting burdens, investment burdens. And if they're also going to be having to pay money for lawsuits with people who are taking them to court due to PFAS contamination, it's really quite a tricky situation. And I think what's interesting to note is that this isn't the only kind of lawsuit that exists. There are also some lawsuits in Sweden where the utilities have been suing. So in this case, it's the Army Corps for PFAS contamination, because a lot of the contamination comes from firefighting foam, right? So, if you're fighting a fire, they've got this foam, and it actually contains PFAS, and then that gets into the water system. And so in this case, the water utilities are saying, no, it's not our fault. It's the fault of these, of the army who are using these firefighting
exactly.
foam.
From where the chemical initially came from. There you go.
Yeah, exactly. And then the third case, so this is happening in the United States, but this also happened a couple of months ago. So this small town in Wisconsin, they're suing the PFAS manufacturers, right? So they've got this big lawsuit against 3M, DuPont, and all these chemical manufacturers who are the people who are actually creating the PFAS in the first place, right? So it's like, the water utilities, yes, they should, they're in charge of drinking water quality, but actually it's been contaminated by the firefighters. But actually, it's not the firefighters' fault. Maybe it's the fault of the chemical companies who have actually created these PFAS.
Provide the extinguisher agent containing PFAS.
Exactly, who've created the chemicals in the first place, right? And so that's the argument that this town in Wisconsin is saying, that they're not suing a local industrial plant; they're suing the manufacturer as a whole for creating these chemical compounds in the first place. And this town in Wisconsin, they have I think 3 or 4 drinking wells which are all contaminated with PFAS, and they've estimated that their costs for upgrading their drinking water plant, etc., to solve this contamination is about $65 million, which is huge for this small town, right? It's quite small. And so their argument is that actually we shouldn't be paying for this. The chemical companies who created these PFAS compounds should be paying for this. Hence their lawsuit, where they're trying to get basically compensation. So I think that, it's interesting to see the different, countries, the different lawsuits where the responsibility for compensation lies. But, personally, I think that, going back to the manufacturers and also, they're big companies, they have a lot of money and they have a lot of capacity to absorb these demands for compensation, whereas a small utility is probably going to be it's going to struggle to pay.
Because the situation we just explained before, that they are like stretched already they are in between exactly. Investment and not having the money and not being allowed to raise too much of the tariffs. So, well, I guess that would be one point to go with, or to motivate, to say it in a nicer way, to motivate the producers of all these chemicals to reduce them or to change them or to do something in the end.
Exactly. Yeah, I think 3M has said that they are going to be phasing out, the PFAS, that they're not going to produce it anymore, which is great because, this town in Wisconsin is not the only town who've sued. They're the first one to sue them directly. There've been some other groups of people who have sued the chemical companies for PFAS contamination. So it is making an impact. Like I said, they're trying to phase out the production. But the reality is that the PFAS is already there. And someone's going to have to pay for that cleanup. So we're hoping it's going to be the people who created the PFAS and not the ones who are, charged with cleaning it up.
Well, that's when comes innovation for those manufacturers. Well, that's what they had to apply innovation and changing or modifying to make it this less dangerous.
Exactly. Yeah. We want creative destruction. We want new
creative destruction. That is the topic. That will be the title of this. Well, let's see. Tallulah, thank you so much. This has been, as always, a blast. A lot of information. Yes, we know for you urbanistas, there's a lot of information, a lot of details, but that's why we will have the show notes with all the details there and the links to the respective sources if you want to check all the small letter and all the data and what applies to you and what are you planning to do directly, whether you are a designer, urban planner, or you work for a utility. How do you see this? How you take and how are you going to take action for this? Thank you so much, Tallulah.
That's great. Thanks so much, Delphin. It was great.
Thank you very much, Urbanistas, and see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Urbanista podcast, a production of Uponor Infra, the leader in sustainable infrastructure solutions. If you found it interesting, why don't you share it with your colleagues? We all together can move our industry forward.